Hello, and Sawadee Krap. This is Teacher Ray from ACS MOP. How are you all doing? Today you will learn about kinematics. Now, what is kinematics? It's about physics. Kinematics is the branch of mechanics that deals with the motion of an object without reference to the force which causes the motion. What does that mean? Now, whenever an object is moving or in motion, we always consider two things: the force that causes the motion and the motion of an object. In kinematics, we only consider the motion. In other words, kinematics quantifies the motion of an object, and it answers three questions: how far, how fast, and how quickly. In our previous videos, you've learned about the position of an object, the difference between distance and displacement. In this video, you will learn about how fast. When we say how fast, we are referring to speed and velocity. Now, I have another video that differentiates speed and velocity. In this video, you will learn only about velocity. And then in the previous videos, you've also learned about how quickly, which is acceleration. Now, before we continue with our lesson, let's go back to your lessons in grade 7 about linear equations. Why do we have to go back? In physics, you will have to learn to find the value of an x. It depends on the formula though, because some formulas, they don't really use x. But x in mathematics, we use that to denote a missing value. Example, in this equation we have 2 plus x equals 7. What is x? How do we find the value of x? What about 2 plus 5x equals 27? What is x? How do we find the value of x? Simple. We rearrange the equation. How do we do that? In our first equation, 2 plus x equals 7, the number 2 must move from this side of the equation to the other side of the equation. And what I always remember is that if it's a plus 2 or positive 2, if it goes to the opposite side of the equation, it becomes the opposite. It becomes minus 2 or negative 2. Example, this is positive 2. If it goes to the opposite side, it becomes minus 2. And the rest you just copy. What is left in this equation is just x. And then we have equals 7. So this is our next equation. From 2 plus x equals 7, you now have x equals 7 minus 2. I think you know the value of x now. What is x? We substitute. X equals what? 7 minus 2, that's 5. This skill is fundamental in physics. If you don't know how to do linear equations and finding the value of x in a linear equation, you will find it hard to learn physics. Let's move on with something more complicated. It's not that complicated though. 2 plus 5x equals 7. What number should we move first? 2 or 5? In finding the value of x, we always move the plus or the minus before we move the times and the divide. In this case, we move the plus 2 before the times 5. This is plus 2. It becomes minus 2. Let's rewrite the equation. So we have a equals 27. We move plus 2. It becomes minus 2. So what is left in the equation now? We have only 5x. This is your second equation. Are we done with this? I don't think so. We need to find the value of x, and only x should be left on one side of the equation. So what else should we do? We move 5 to the opposite side. We transpose, transfer of position. Anyway, let's find the value of 27 minus 2 first. This is 25. Next is we move 5. This is times 5. Times 5 becomes divided by 5. If it's divided by 5, it becomes times 5. All right, in this case, we have times 5. It becomes divided by 5. Leave x. And then divide this by 5. There you go. I think you know the value of x. What is x? X equals 5. Practice your linear equations before you learn physics. Again, what is kinematics? It answers how far, how fast, and how quickly. Now, what is how fast? That's velocity. What is velocity? Velocity measures the rate at which an object changes position over time. What does that mean? It means that whenever there's a change in position, there's a displacement. What is displacement? Example, let me stand from point A, and then I run to point B. Point A is my first position. Point B is my next position. I changed position from point A to point B. That is a displacement. I was displaced. That was my first place. I was displaced to point B, my next position. I have a displacement. We measure how far point A is to point B. And then we consider the time. How fast did I change from point A to point B? So what is the formula for velocity? How do we solve the problem? How fast did I change from point A to point B? Now remember, the formula for velocity is displacement over time. That's what exactly the description says so. The definition of velocity is the rate at which displacement changes over time. Let's have an example. A person's original position is at point A. It takes 5 seconds for the person to change from point A to point B. Now, how far is point A to point B? It's 10 meters away. How fast did the person change from point A to point B? In other words, what is the person's velocity? I always start with a diagram to put everything in perspective. From point A to point B, how far are they? Point A is 10 meters away from point B. The person ran from point A to point B, which is 10 meters. How much time did it take the person to change from point A to point B? It took the person 5 seconds. There you go. The whole word problem is illustrated in a diagram. And the next thing I do is write the given. Always start with a given after the diagram, so you know what is missing in the equation. Remember, the formula for velocity is v equals s over t. What is s? That's the displacement. What is t? That's the time. What is v? That's the velocity. In the word problem, if we start with a given, the displacement is given. Time is also given. What about velocity? Velocity is not given. So from here alone, we know what's missing. Whatever is missing, that's what we solve for. So in this case, we solve for v. And we know the formula for v is displacement over time. The given in the diagram is the displacement is 10 meters. The time is 5 seconds. What is the v? V, or velocity, is displacement over time. Replace s with 10 meters. replace t with 5 seconds. And then you get the value for velocity. Velocity equals 2 meters per second, m over s. Let's have another example for velocity. A person runs 8 meters from point A to point B, and then goes back to point C, which is 4 meters away from point B, or 4 meters back. How do we visualize that? Let's say a person starts from point A, and then he ran to point B, and then he goes back to point C. What is the displacement there? To illustrate this in a diagram, the person starts from point A, right here. He runs 8 meters to point B, and then he goes back to point C. How far is point C? Now, where is the displacement there? Remember, for velocity, we always consider the displacement. So point A is 8 meters away from point B, and then point C is 4 meters back from point B. So that means that the person's displacement is from point A to point C alone, and that's 4 meters. Time, 4 seconds. Let's start with a given. How do we get 4 meters for the displacement? Simple. 8 meters to the right, 4 meters back, so that's 8 minus 4. So what is left? That's 4 meters. That's the displacement. What about the time? Time is 4 seconds. Formula. Velocity equals displacement over time. We substitute. What is the displacement? It's 4 meters. What is the time? 4 seconds. There you go. I think you can easily solve for velocity. 4 meters divided by 4 seconds, you get 1 meter per second. So for your next video, I will teach you about the position versus time graph. This is Teacher Ray from ACS MLP and Sawadee Kap.